Hello all. Thank you very much for turning up for this hour on Learn to Live Parents Evening. And we're just going to wait for a few numbers to crop up. We've actually got 33 live people watching at the moment. So around there. So I think we can start off a little bit. So this hour-long event is targeted at parents of young adults who are newly qualified drivers, those learning to drive or passengers of new drivers. And the speakers and stories will highlight the risks of inexperience and common factors that affect safety of young people on the roads. Guidance will be provided in best practices, technology will be discussed, and its availability to aid young adults with their driving, such as telematics and apps, which driving instructors to choose, as well as opportunities to hear from families and emergency service workers about their personal experiences. So I'm going to introduce, first of all, Ollie Taylor, you can see on your screens there. He's an incredibly experienced lead investigating officer, inspector in Devon and Cornwall Police. And we've got Andy Nichols, who is Devon and Somerset Fire and Rescue Service Road Safety Officer and Governor for South West Ambulance Trust, 32 years as a paramedic. Hello, Andy.
Hi.
Just pop, yeah, thank you. Chris Boston is Devon and Somerset Fire and Rescue Service Road Safety Lead Officer and Operational Watch Manager. So he's still out and about. And I believe you're at the station there, aren't you?
I am indeed.
Okay.
So let's hope there's no call.
Okay, lovely. Yeah, exactly. Well, it'll be alarming, perhaps, if there is, but it'll be good. Tamsin Ferris works in Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service in Cornwall Council, Road Safety Department. And we've got Andy Cox, who is from Lincolnshire, Detective Chief Superintendent. They don't get much higher rank than that. And he is the national lead for serious injury and fatal collision. So not much of a responsible job there, Andy, but so thank you so much for joining us. I think I can hear a tapping keyboard. I don't know who it is, but if we can just try to, I don't know who that, can you hear that tapping keyboard? So first of all, Andy, Chris, could I just ask you what, just so that people can understand what it is, what is Learn to Live and why are we actually here?
Okay, so good evening, everyone. Learn to Live is a partnership event which involves all of the emergency services. It involves parents of those who have lost loved ones in serious or fatal road traffic collisions. And it's aimed at 17 to 24-year-olds. We're in our 13th year, and it is really about promoting road safety. That, in a nutshell, is Learn to Live.
You're on mute, Harry.
I'm glad it's Harry that's done it. Makes me feel a whole lot better.
It comes to a thing when I'm muting myself, isn't it? That's where even I think I go on too long. So thanks very much for that. It was just a tiny little bit of feedback, and I was wondering if that would get rid of it, but it doesn't. But okay, so the topics we're going to talk about really is, Ollie, I'm going to throw you into it now, is finding a good driving instructor. What are we actually looking for with regards to that for a parent? Where do they start? Are all driving instructors the same, etc.?
No, absolutely not, Harry. Good evening, everybody else. Driving instructors yes, it can be a minefield. There are different grades of driving instructors. There are trainee driving instructors. There are fully qualified driving instructors. There are all sorts of different types. The one thing when choosing a driving instructor that I would hugely advocate against is the ones that say from 0 to hero in 5 days. Start lessons on Monday, pass your test on Friday. Absolutely not in any way, shape or form. Putting a young driver behind the wheel after just 5 days of experience on the road is asking for trouble. They don't have the experience needed to be a safe driver. And we'll talk more about that in a bit, about practice and things like that. But with regards to driving instructors, you know, how fast and how cheap can you get my son or daughter through their driving test? Again, we want to get away from this. It's all about looking at a driving instructor with a good reputation, look at their online presence, speak to friends and family who maybe have had sons and daughters who've learned to drive, get their experiences to see if they can recommend a driving instructor. So it's always good to go and recommend, but also ask about their experiences as well. So apart from teaching a young person to drive, are they going to teach the life skills associated with those mechanical skills? Are they going to teach road safety as part of that package of driving lessons? Because the mechanical skills of junctions, roundabouts, gear changes, vitally important. The life skills that go with that to make the right decision at the right point in time when they haven't got that little voice of conscience sat next to them, be it a driving instructor or a parent or a friend or a relative, whether before they pass their test. We've got to understand, we've got to know they're going to make the right decision at the right time. So road safety education is as vital as the mechanics of learning to drive.
Yeah, exactly. It's an interesting comment here from Ian. It's a shame that the time frame for learning to drive cannot be regulated, because I've got to admit, it was when I was doing my test, it was like, you can do it in a week and get it done. And it's a little bit more the whole point. If we look at the Learn to Live, the statistics, who can help us with some of the statistics about being 50% more likely to be involved in a collision, for example, in the first year, and the age gap, the age between 17 and 24, isn't it, where there's more chance of being involved in a collision?
We know that 50% of young drivers, 1 in 5 young drivers are involved in a collision within their first 12 months. So we know that's a particularly risky time. Obviously, if they've then learned to drive in 5 days, where we're advocating the average learner undertakes 100 hours, that obviously adds additional time to that risk period. And we know young drivers are, their brains are still developing, they're still, they're very new in their journey, that it's really important they take it, as Ollie said, they don't rush in, they don't go all in, and they really are aware of the limitations. Basically, until you're 24 years old, your brain isn't even fully developed. So your prefrontal cortex, which deals with your impulsive decisions and behavior, it's your hazard perception, it's your ability to sort of make decisions under pressure, isn't actually fully developed. So it's just a scientific fact that they are more at risk due to their age, and they can be the most responsible 20-year-old, 18-year-old, but it's just a fact their brain is not developed in such a way that it allows them to make the same decisions that a new driver perhaps at 30 would make. And that's just the way the body and the brain works. So it's really important just to be aware of that, I think, and for parents, that's a really valuable thing to appreciate, that the behaviors they display that are perhaps making them vulnerable and unsafe, not because they're not wanting to be responsible, it's just the mechanics of their brain. So it is being really aware of that, I think.
That's brilliant. And look, Natasha's brought up here, hasn't it? What's the main cause of road traffic accidents for new drivers? Is it down to skill, error, or other factors? What is it?
If we look at the statistics, we know speed is a big factor, and that is immediately linked to the risk taking and the fact that they aren't able to have such impulse control as we would like. So speed, loss of control, that sort of thing, we do see that really, really commonly in young driver collisions.
Certainly, if I can just come in there, one of the things which we do really advocate, we do really go on within our Learn to Live presentations, and certainly in all the education, is about peer pressure. And peer pressure is one of those things we really do need to hit home about. I've watched something just recently which states that if you have 2 passengers within the car as a newly qualified driver, it doubles the risk of having an accident. If you have 3 people in the car as passengers, it will triple the risk of having an accident. So I know we're going to talk in a moment about having the rules within the cars, and Ollie, I think, is going to touch on that in a moment. But I think it's really important for the driver to understand those risks of peer pressure and having those additional passengers and how they can influence you as that driver.
Yeah, and so and that's why there are certain driving instructors. I think Ollie was looking at is certain driving instructors. First of all, you've got the ones that they'll get you through your driving test. This is how you change gear, and this is how you get through a junction safely. But there's others that are done a lot more training and exams, and they are actually very interested. And you were involved in a charity, weren't you, Ollie, with where the AAA and driving instructors were very much on the the fatal five, if you like, those that speed, the drink, the seat belts, you know, the distraction, it's the mobile phones, isn't it? And lack of experience or whatever, but all those aspects, and that's just so important. Go on.
Yeah, we were very keen to work with driving instructors to encourage them to deliver a consistent set of road safety messages on our behalf. We would love to be able to sit next to every new driver there is. We'd love that. We can't achieve that as professionals. I think it's worth just pointing out briefly at this stage as well, Harry, that I think all of us on the panel this evening are parents first and professionals second. So we all speak as professionals, but actually we can all speak with experiences as parents. You know, two sons, as you well know, Harry, both been through the whole driving experience. As a parent, terrifying, absolutely terrifying. Talk more about obviously practice and things like that later, but certainly, you know, everybody here this evening, and I know I can speak to other members of the panel, that we are all here as parents as well as professionals in our various work streams. So this road safety education is absolutely vital, and this is where parents and relatives of new and young drivers can do so much to assist. They really can. Without even thinking about it, they can do an awful lot to assist trying to keep that young person safe. Right from the fact that we know that by the time somebody gets behind the wheel at the age of 17 or 18, they have already had about 14 to 15 years driving experience, because they've been watching whoever's been driving them around. And we know that. Studies have shown that. They are watching the person driving them around. And we've got some utter horror stories, things young drivers have done because mum, dad, big brother, big sister, auntie, uncle, whoever's driven them around has done it. They've then seen that as completely acceptable behaviour, completely normal behaviour. So any parents out there that are listening, or grandparents or aunts and uncles who may be going to take young drivers out, or even passengers, do not forget, you are a role model. Absolutely. Do parents role model the right behaviours for Ian Adams? No, they absolutely don't. And I've got a friend I can think of who is not a good role model behind the wheel for their daughters, her daughters, and you know, and I encourage her and say, just remember, they're watching everything you do. If it's all right, if it's good enough for mum or dad, grandma or granddad, it's going to be good enough for them when they get behind the wheel. So if they do something wrong, don't shout at them, because it's just learned behaviour. It's vital. This learned behaviour is really important to get around and get the message across. What you are doing, they will follow.
Thank you. I mean, I want to bring Andy into this really, because you're looking from the national aspect. You know, the serious injury, the fatalities. Is there anything that you find really frustrating that you want, if you could change tomorrow, you could change about the training circumstance? You know, the system that we have with learning to drive, the tests as they are. We've recently got it, the fact that the driving instructors can take you out on the motorways now, whereas before they didn't. You just went on the motorway on your own, didn't you, and see what happened. But is there anything that you could think could be instantly changed?
Yeah, so thanks, Harry, and hopefully everybody can hear me, because I've got some IT issues, I think, so maybe a couple of seconds time lag. And first, as has been indicated just now, I think by Ollie, you know, I'm a parent. I've got a 22-year-old and a 19-year-old, and obviously I've gone through that phase of them learning to drive and being out on the road essentially. So it's a very responsible role first as a parent. Because one of the things I see in my role in terms of overseeing fatal collisions, in my previous job in London where I oversaw fatal collisions as well, is people don't operate in hindsight. So, you know, they don't think it will happen to them. They think it's okay for them to do that bit of speed, and it's okay for them to do that overtake. They can drive along without using their seatbelt and nothing will happen to them. And obviously I meet the people where it does happen to them. And it's absolute devastation for them. It's devastation for their family. It's devastation for everybody involved. And I think, therefore, being the role model in relation to the question that Ian asked is absolutely essential. Because one of the things we don't do, so the cases that I see, and I look at the national data, speeding is the biggest single cause of fatal collisions. And people sometimes don't associate speeding that way. They don't see it as a crime. It is a crime. I constantly use the terminology road crime. And I think when people just see it's a bit of speed, and I've got my, you know, speed awareness workshop, they almost see it as sometimes a badge of honor, and they don't associate it in the way that they should. But when you think, you know, 1,800 people a year in the UK die on the roads, of which about 900 have a direct link to speed and speed in, I think you understand the significance of that. So I think the thing I'd really like to see in terms of is that culture change where people drive safely and sensibly and put the safety of others first and safety themselves first. Because the reality is, by speeding, and this is particularly relevant for young people who might have that urge to speed, frankly. I mean, if they see others do it, if they see their parents do it, they think it's okay for them to do it. And actually they're not as skilled as they think they are. They can have that devastating impact happen to them. And I think, so number one is the culture change, to really associate it to crime, associate it to the amount of people that die and the devastation that is caused, and drive sensibly. So I think in terms of national sort of guidance and direction, one of the things we're campaigning for is to put some form of technology speed limiter on vehicles. But I don't know if it's going to come up later, Harry, but I think, that telematic drive of having, the black box system in your car. So, I think.
Well, please mention it now.
Yeah.
That'd be quite.
So as a parent, I think, well, two things, and if I can. So as a parent, I would want a black box in the car, which insurers often recognise and therefore incentivise premiums and make them lower, because it encourages safe and sensible driving. And I'd also counsel to have dash cam as well, because dash cam is a really, really sensible way for parents to influence the way their kids drive, because obviously you can see it and you can see exactly how they're driving and the way they drive and everything else. So I think putting those two things together for technology, that will help you influence your child's behaviour, but also be that role model yourself, because actually challenge speeding drivers, whether that's yourself, whether that's your kids as well, and to make them recognise the harm that can be caused by them going above that speed limit and driving dangerously.
Thank you. Okay, so right, I've chosen my instructor. I want to get a car for my son, my daughter. Where do I start? Where do I sort of look for a type of car to get for them? I mean,
Harry, just before you answer that, just an interesting comment from Bertie Bassett. Autobahns in Germany work fine.
Yeah, I was going to.
They do, Bertie, but that's because all the traffic's travelling in the same direction. So multi-lane carriageways, dual carriageways and motorways actually tend to be some of the safest roads in the country, because all the traffic's travelling at predominantly the same speed and it's all travelling one direction. The minute that you go onto some of our A roads, you get people then travelling at excess speed on A roads, tighter bends, dips, sort of things are into different microclimates, that sort of thing. Then you'll find it all goes spectacularly wrong. And I know virtually all of us here have attended RTCs, fatal RTCs, as a result of excess speed on A and B roads, not necessarily on motorways. If it does go wrong on the motorway, then it tends to be fairly catastrophic because of the speeds involved. But actually, that's why the autobahns in Germany tend to work quite well, because of those very reasons. So it's not really that we're looking at. It's your A and B roads, which are some of our higher risk routes, if you like. This is all over the country. This isn't just restricted to Devon and Cornwall. This is going to be countrywide. Yeah. So sorry,
so
Harry,
pick up that point. No, there's no problem. And I don't know what the barriers are like with the autobahns as well. Just bear in mind, Ollie and I have been police officers on the motorways, and at 70 miles an hour, you're still doing 105 feet every second. So the point is, it might not be your fault, but when you get clipped as someone comes out because they haven't done a shoulder check, at 70, you're coming off at 105 feet per second. So 90 is a lot more, 135 feet per second. And because a lot of our motorways doesn't have the protection bars on the side, you are spinning off and rolling off into the scenery, and then we're going to your relatives to say you're not coming home. So there's probably volume of traffic as well. There's a lot involved in just saying that. But, I don't blame you for thinking that. Go on.
Just to mention about speed. So there's a bit of an urban myth out there. Why have the police chosen speed limits, etc.? Is it because they just don't want people driving fast? It's related to human injury. So your body will only, we're very fragile human beings. So a lot of people say to me, why is it only a 20-mile speed limit outside of school? And there's some physics and health about that, in that if you hit a child at 20, they'll be injured, but they will survive the impact. But if it's a 30-mile-an-hour collision, the likelihood is they will have an internal injury that will kill them. And it's the same principle on motorways. Apart from your thinking time in the distance, it's about what your body can deal with and absorb in terms of trauma. And vehicles are really good now, but if you're doing 100 miles an hour and you hit a tree, you're 99.5% probably going to be deceased when we arrive, unfortunately.
And go on, please, Chris.
Yeah, just coming in on that and talking about the autobahns and certainly motorways. certainly most of the collisions I've attended have been A roads and B roads, where there have been serious injuries and fatalities. It's more often than not, it's due to furniture on the side of the road, it's due to trees, and that sort of street furniture or road furniture as we know it, trees, you don't tend to find them on the autobahn, or you don't maybe tend to find them on the motorways. So certainly A roads, B roads, the risk is certainly greater, certainly in my opinion, my experience. And I think we had a message there. Hi from Australia, was it?
Yes, hi from Australia.
Hi back there.
Yeah, really good. Nige Flower, who we all know and respect, and so he's absolutely right. Somebody said they'd heard that most of the collisions were in 30-mile-an-hour limits. No, that's not, and because a lot of the 30-mile-an-hour limits, traffic's so slow. It's just as Andy Nichols said there, because two Andys here. Well, there's one now because he's got IT issues. Is that a lot of the collisions under 20 and below are a lot less serious, thank goodness. So yeah, it's going too fast for the circumstances. Is time and time again. It's just going too fast for the circumstances. It's not a speed limit. It's not a speed target. It's a speed limit. But we will sort of move on a little bit now. So cars, I was thinking, really, we're looking for cars that are less than 10 years old. Yeah. I think is a must, really, because they've got that technology. I mean, how valuable is your child? But you've got to keep it reasonable as well. And I think a lot of cars under 10 have reasonable safety facilities now, don't they? Chris, is what you're coming in?
If we certainly 10 years or newer would be our recommendation. 6 years or newer, even better. Certainly, when we're looking at the M ratings, the higher the rating, the better the safety is going to be. Cars are designed now to keep you protected within that console, within that area, and crumple around you. So the more we can invest into that car, but the more we're investing, or the more our young drivers are investing in themselves. So certainly 10 years or newer, 6 years or newer, even better. Certainly look at the rating. But again, from a parent's point of view, if you're going out to buy a car, get it checked by a professional. Look at the history of the car. Make sure it's got nothing which you need to be concerned about on advisories. And do your homework. Look up the cars, see what safety aspects it's got on that particular vehicle. But yeah, do your homework.
And of course the telematics as well. And I've even had circumstances where insurance, we've got the black box, so to speak, then that governs how the driver is going. The child, you want to say the young person, really, because they're not children, but the young person has then said, "No, Dad, you're not borrowing my car because you go 35 in a 30 limit, and you'll put my credit down." So and it can go that way as well. It's that setting that example. I just wanted as well is it's important that we mention with. I mean, Guy then said, well, he was told that 30. Yes, there's probably more collisions in 30-mile-an-hour limits, but they tend to be collision damage only or minor injury. It's the serious injuries, the fatalities and serious injuries tend to be more A roads. That's all. I mean, I can say just with experience with that one, really.
If I can just come in there, Harry.
Go on, please.
We want to stop all collisions on the road. Would be a lovely target, wouldn't it? Because even the smallest of collisions can stay with our young drivers for a very, very long time. It doesn't have to be a serious collision. It doesn't have to be a fatality. They are horrendous, but smallest of collisions can really stay with our young drivers. So, yeah.
I would say, what Chris has just mentioned is really important. So I remember a young lad I dealt with who had a collision, broke his femur. Now he was 18, going to college, he had a job, and all that his road to recovery was about 1.5 years. He wasn't severely injured, but I mean, a broken femur is bad enough. But in terms of how it affected his lifestyle, so he couldn't go out with his friends, he lost his job, he couldn't get to college anymore. And he got stuck indoors day after day. So even minor collisions have massive impacts on people's well-being. I think that's, we all think of the fatalities and how horrible they are, but actually some of the smaller collisions cause as much upset and upheaval as some of the big ones in terms of how that young person's life is changed.
Andy, did you want to say something in on that?
I did, yeah. Sorry, so my signal's so bad now. I've changed my sim, so hopefully this works slightly better. But so I just want to come back on the collision data there as well. So absolutely, so I think there's no doubt for obviously the driver themselves, those higher speed roads are the more likely fatal occurrences. Unfortunately, all the data about that, but I think the point around 20 and 30 mile an hour zones, I just wanted to touch on, because the data I looked at in London would show them as the most prevalent for fatal and serious injury collisions, and that's because the vulnerable road user, so that is your cyclist or your pedestrian. So I think in those zones, because there's more likely to be walkers and cyclists about, that does have a higher sort of degree of fatal and serious collisions for people obviously outside the car. And the point I was going to probably try and make in that regard, so if you do have that speeding young driver or whatever they may be doing wrong, it can have a real impact to them in terms of their emotional impact. It might not physically impact them, but they'll have to live with the scars of obviously the impact to others, but also to their sort of obviously their license going forward. So because we want them to have a really prosperous life, don't we? So we don't want to necessarily impact their driver license, which restricts their job employment, that gives them higher insurance costs and everything else. But that's the reality of if you're driving in a certain fashion, those sorts of roads, that it can on occasion obviously have that impact. So I just wanted to really clarify that with the data, because I know in 20 and 30 mile an hour zones there are a higher level, but that's obviously outside the car and it's to those vulnerable road users, as I say.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Andy. I wanted to just roll it on now, talking about hazard perception practices. And of course, this can be done before, whilst with the parents, with trusted friends, with training and things like that. I wondered, Tamsin, are you able to talk about hazard perceptions really, and what people are? What is it? What is it exactly?
Absolutely. So we know part of the test that these young drivers have to do before they can pass their test, is a theory test, and part of that involves a hazard perception test. If you Google that, there's a lot of websites telling you how to pass that test, as opposed to actually the point of the test. So the point of the test is that when young drivers go into a vehicle, certainly through their learning experience and beyond that, they need to be really aware of the importance of hazard perception. It focuses specifically the driving test on developing hazards. So it's looking at young drivers put in a scenario on a screen where they're trying to teach them, if you like, to be looking not just at where they're going on the road ahead, but also things that are approaching, any hazards that may be developing within their environment. And that's obviously a really important skill that they will definitely need when they are learning to drive. And beyond that, forever as a driver, you need that skill. So the sort of test that is required just is 14 clips. The hazards vary, and so it's trying to give them broad exposure to that. But I think our point is, as professionals, that lots and lots of work can be done. As has been already mentioned, they have more than 10 plus years of being a road user. You don't need hazard perception skills only to drive a vehicle. You need them as a pedestrian, you need them as a cyclist, you need them as a general road user. And the thing that was mentioned earlier about the mirroring behaviour, we know that from road safety. As a parent, if you don't use that pedestrian crossing, your child doesn't learn. Pedestrian crossings are there to protect you. So we know that that is really important. So hazard perception starts from such a young age, and it's just knowing the importance of that and really appreciating why that's so important to young drivers at the point they are unsupervised ultimately in a vehicle post-test.
So what about examples, Ollie? So it could actually be quite fun, actually, if you could be a passenger as well, couldn't you, Ollie? While you're trying to learn, you know what I mean, Ollie. Get me out of my misery.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Harry. And this is such an easy thing for parents, grandparents. Even with a young driver who's not in the driving seat, sat in the passenger seat. It's about learning about your environment. Now, Nigel just put a really good point in the chat. It's about what you can see, what you can't see, what you can expect to see. There's actually a fourth one there, not to put Nigel on the spot, but actually the 4 principles I drive with all the time, whether it be through work or in my own car, is what can I see, what can't I see, what can I reasonably expect to happen, and what am I going to do if things turn out differently to the way I expect? What is my contingency plan? What is my escape route? And those 4 things are going around in my head all the time when I'm driving, all the time. Obviously, the faster I'm driving as an emergency response driver, the faster those are going around in my head. But actually, they are always there. They're always bouncing around. So thinking about your environment, think about your road environment. What can you learn from your road environment? You can learn masses. What we need to do is encourage people not to drive a foot in front of the end of their bonnet, where an awful lot of drivers tend to drive. They literally drive in that little bubble around them. That's all they look at. But actually look at what we call the limit point. How far can you see up ahead? You can see through a series of bends. You might be able to see the road half a mile away. You can't see much in between, but you can see the road half a mile away. If you look up half a mile away and there's a whole lot of red lights in the distance, there's a good chance something's going on. You can start to prepare yourself for that half a mile back. But actually, even closer than that, you're driving down the road. If you're looking out the road and the size of the road are, thank you, Nigel, duly noted, is that if the bins are out, classic example, if the bins are out, it's bin day. And there's a chance that you're going to drive around a corner and find a bin lorry sat in the middle of the road. It's a sign. It's an indication of what you're going to be facing. If you're driving past down a road and there are bus stops and there are people at the bus stops, there's a good chance the bus is behind you. If there are people at bus stops on the opposite side of the road, there's going to be ahead of you. You might come around a corner and find a bus out in the middle of the road. That could well mean a car's overtaking the bus. Be prepared for it. Be planning for it. You can plan for your environment. There's so many different things you can see. You know, driving along the road, especially if it's fresh and still warm, there's a very good chance there's going to be a horse around there somewhere. So you ease your speed right back. But you can do this with new and young drivers. You can get them to start thinking about that road environment, doing hazard perception with them. Just ask them, what can they see around them? What are they looking at? What's the most important thing to them for road safety at that moment in time? Is it the cyclist? Is it the person walking the dog on the pavement? Is it the little toddler on a bike or desperately trying to let go of mum or dad's hand, and are they going to come out into the road? Once you've spotted it, you can plan for it, you can pass it safely, basically. So, you know, it is really about using your environment to aid driving. Don't assume the same thing's going to happen because you've driven down the road 100 times and the same thing's happened 100 times. Do not assume it's going to happen the same on the 101st time, because sod's law ain't.
And there's nothing more satisfying, is there? Ollie, there's nothing more satisfying. I was driving my mum back from Truro towards Newquay, and there was a sign saying hedge cutting ahead, and I could see on this side of the road there was a little bit of trimming going on, and I said, "Oh, Mum, we better slow down because round the next bend there'll be I mean, it was there in front of us, but a lot of people will miss the obvious stuff, and it's very satisfying when you say, "Oh, look, I bet it's bin day today. Those bins are empty. There'll be a truck round," and there they are. So it's almost like a game in the car you can play with your parents when they're driving or you're driving or whatever, really, isn't it? Really.
I think just on that, as a parent who teaching my daughter to drive, get them to put their phone away. When they get in the car and they are a passenger, get them to put their phone away and look to see what they can see, because whilst they're on the phone, they're not going to be having that benefit of what experience we've got as drivers.
Brilliant. And so can we emphasize really with all this is that we're looking at sort of 100 hours supervised practice, aren't we? And so, you know, what's and Andy Nichols, because you're Andy, the other Andy's struggling. So when he gets on, I'll ask him a question straight away. Okay. But you know, as far as why is that so important, Andy? You've been a paramedic for 32 years. There is nothing you haven't been to. And so why is that so important that they have 100 hours supervised practice?
I think it comes down to experience and risk. Young people don't perceive risk in the same way we would, as their parents would, which is why you worry about them so much all the time, and why I don't bungee. My son would jump off a cliff on a bungee tomorrow and not even consider it as being dangerous. So there are other factors that are sort of, they're more prone to. So speeding is something we've spoken about. The fatal five, we call them: speeding, seatbelts. So younger people are less likely to wear a seatbelt, especially in the back of a vehicle, and they become a moving an object within a vehicle. If that vehicle has a collision, they strike people around them at high velocity, and they injure themselves and injure other people. Then you've got distraction, Well, we all know as younger people what it was like traveling in a car at 3 a.m. after coming out of a nightclub. Apart from your hearing being completely damaged, you're enjoying the evening, you're enjoying your friends, and that can lead the driver to become involved in that distraction. Mobile phones, videos, phone conversations, etc. There's the obvious careless driving, inconsiderate driving, riding on the back of people's bumpers, etc. And then, of course, drink driving we all know about, and I think really everyone knows about drink driving, but I think it's the recreational drugs have become more of an issue for us. So we're finding more and more young people are driving, having used recreational drugs like marijuana, maybe even the day before, and don't realize that stuff is still in your system when you get in the car in the morning or in the evening. And so consequently, they're getting involved in collisions. And the other thing we see is when their toxicology is done on the blood, they're coming back with high levels of cocaine or whatever. And I think personally, I'm finding drug driving, so driving under the influence of drugs, a much bigger problem than drink driving. I personally find that a bigger issue nowadays myself.
Now, I'm going to go to Andy. I want to get you in very quickly, but Ollie first, because there's something very specific I want to ask you about this. Ollie, what Andy just said there about drug driving, that was certainly my experience. Any collision involved, there was always cannabis or cocaine even around, a social drug. What are the issues then? So say young person, they're driving, and then they get 3 points. How many do they have before they have to redo their test within a short period of time? This is what they need to be aware of, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it's surprising the number of young drivers who don't know, although all driving instructors should tell them that as a new driver, all you need is 6 points to lose your license. And if you get 6 points in the first 2 years after passing your test, then that's your license gone. You have to go right back to the beginning. You have to do your theory, do your practical test again. If you try and get insurance after losing your license, you are going to find you're so high risk that the vast majority of insurance companies won't touch you. And the ones that will rank the price right up into the thousands, and 5,000, 10,000. My older son Charlie had a collision 7 months after passing his test. Unfortunately, he was one of these statistics. Parked his car on its roof in the middle of a country lane. He was fine, thankfully. But when he went to get insurance for the car he replaced it with, of the companies that would look at him, they really ranked the insurance right up. And there were other companies were quoting him up to £10,000 for a year insurance on a 1.2, I think it was a Vauxhall Astra, up to £10,000. The car was only worth about £2,500, £3,000, and they wanted 10 grand for insurance. And that wasn't even losing his license. That was just being involved in a collision. So losing your license, one speeding ticket, then you're under the microscope. You've only got 3 points and that's it, gone. One mobile phone offence, license is gone. An impairment offence, drink driving or drug driving, that's definitely your license gone. You're going to get disqualified for that as well. And that's going to be nigh on impossible to get insurance coming out of something like that.
Thank you. And Andy Cox then, what do you think needs to be improved? Because I know on your social media, you're quite hot on this. You're quite frustrated, aren't you, about the criminal justice system and how it deters people?
Yeah, definitely. So I think within society, without getting too deep at the moment, within society, there's this view that they're just traffic offences. They don't really see the harm that is caused to communities. 5 people every day in the UK die in fatal road crashes, and 60 people are seriously injured every single day. So just think about that for a minute. So that's 5 people today that will die and 60 that are seriously injured. And I think the sentencing doesn't reflect that. So to be honest, I have very little patience on this. So if anybody, whether that's a young driver, middle-aged driver, old driver, is driving whilst impaired, so the conversation started around misuse of drugs, then they are a significant risk to themselves on the road and significant risk to others. And I've met obviously families of people that are bereaved because somebody drove whilst drugged up. And therefore, as Ollie just really articulated really, really well, I'm really, really pushing for stronger sentencing. So is your license gone if you're found impaired? The point that's made around insurance, absolutely right. Insurers don't want to touch you. And if they do touch you, they're going to really, really hit you hard in the pocket. Who's normally paying for that? The parents in the background. But the main thing for me, putting all that to one side, is safety. Because, the fact is, if you drive whilst impaired, you are statistically significantly at higher risk to yourself and others. And I think we just need to reflect on, would, for example, many drivers who perhaps go out with cannabis or other drugs in their system, they're not the type of people that perhaps would take a knife out into the street because they'd recognise that's a crime. They'd recognise that could bring people to harm. Well, likewise, whilst you're driving, you can cause harm, and it needs to move from being seen as a traffic offence to one of being crime, because that's how people stop being so affected. And when it's your family member that's bereaved because of one of these drivers who drives whilst impaired or through other issues, you understand they have very, very little tolerance for the whole situation. So I think the message really needs to be, understand the harm that can be caused to communities and drive sensibly.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Mike Hock has been putting in a couple of good questions. Well, first of all, we've got to be a little bit careful that we don't talk about specific vehicles, but is there any specific vehicle that youngsters shouldn't be going after at the moment, really? Go on, Chris.
I would say on that, anything more than 10 years old. I'm going back to what we said before. You as a parent or as a young driver, you will buy what you can afford, but really try and go to the absolute maximum and keep it to 10 years or newer. Go for something which is 10 years newer. Also, Mike Hock said about the music, is it a distraction? Certainly from my point of view, I would say that's really going to be dependent on how loud that music's being played. If you can't hear a siren coming up behind you or something going on around you, then yes, 100% it's a distraction.
And thank you. And because you are on watch and your section might run out of the door any moment there, good. Can you touch on dealing with emergency vehicles? Is this a slight diversion, but we'll bring it back very shortly. But it's really important, isn't it? Emergency vehicles, as many get nervous on hearing that siren. I know Ollie will exactly the same, and Andy there, and well, pretty much everyone here. What's your advice on that?
Okay, if you've got an emergency vehicle coming up behind you, just drive steady. Look for a safe place for you to pull in. Don't mount the curb. Don't pass through any traffic lights. Don't take any action which would put anyone at any risk. We will slow up as emergency drivers and we will take the action we need to take. If we are coming to red lights and we cannot get by, we will turn all our blues and twos off and we will just wait there patiently until we can get by. So don't take any action which is going to put people at risk. Don't get nervous over it.
Wonderful. Okay, right. So congratulations. We've passed our test. Our youngster has passed their test. Is that the end of it now? Can we just crack on and forget all we were taught? Is this a loaded question or not? So what about continued learning then, really? What should they be doing? What can they do with learning more when they've passed their test? Is that important, or do you think they've learned everything?
That's where it starts. That's the journey. Taking the test is the day when you show you have that standard. Your journey starts from there on, and you are going to learn so much from that day. And it's just going to be continuous. It's been continuous for all of us as emergency drivers and as parents. So, yeah, you will just.
And I heard really good advice as well. Is that when you've passed your test, and even certainly when you've passed your test, go out with an experienced driver when it's raining quite hard, or when it's quite windy, or on the motorway at night, or something like that, if the opportunity is available, and get that experience, wouldn't you say, in a safer environment than just heading out on your own and hoping for the best?
That comes within that 100 hours or more and 12 months or more. When you're learning to drive, you should be going out in all different conditions. You should be going out day, night. I'm going to put a question to the panel, if I may, actually, about when you're learning to drive. Should it be an experience you share with family, friends, or should you be keeping this to a driving instructor?
Well, I know me with my son.
Chris, having taken.
Go on. Over to you. Go on. Someone say, okay, I know with my son, it's a joke, isn't it? That you say never train your own family, never go with your own family. And I was one of those. My son is absolutely the most wonderful person. However, I could not believe how much he couldn't hear me in the car, and I could feel myself getting more angst and frustrated. And yet, some people don't have a problem, do they? Would you say it depends who your parents are, or who is actually training, and that rapport, really, isn't it?
Yeah, hugely. And recognise that as well, isn't it? If you
absolutely
are not the right
Harry.
person, yeah, then don't do it.
Harry.
Yeah. Ollie, you've frozen.
It depends who's driving as well, Harry.
Okay.
I was going to say it depends who's driving.
Okay. In what way? Explain. Sorry. Explain.
No. Obviously, you know both my sons. You know both my sons, Harry. They were both very different characters behind the wheel. Very different.
Right.
I didn't teach them to drive. That's not my job.
Yeah.
I saw the role of the parent is taking them out for that practice in between lessons, take them that practice, doing that observational work with them, that hazard and perception and planning. Let the instructor do the formal teaching, teach them what they need to know, teach them all about the mechanics, take them out for the practice in between lessons, but not the first lesson they've had. Let them get a little bit of used to the roads first, otherwise it can all go horribly wrong.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Go on. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, Harry, just on that, and I think certainly from my own point of view, a driving instructor, an ADI, advanced driving instructors recommended, they will have what is current, what is relevant, and what the new driver need to know in order to get them to that standard. I think from a parent's point of view, I think we can just build on that, but we've just got to be really careful as parents not to pass on anything which is out of date, anything which is just not going to put them in a good place when learning to drive.
Yeah, I think it's really good. And it was something I learned is that you either, even as a parent, you either go out and drive every day the same way as you drove before, or you sort of learn something new every day. Some people, it's just a real inconvenience. We've all stopped them when they've been speeding. So, just get on with it, give us a ticket and get on with it. They're not they don't understand that actually there's real flesh and blood at the end of it, and their lives will fall apart, and they could go to prison if they get involved in a collision. It won't happen to them. It's an inconvenience to get to the office as quickly as they can. And that is where the problem, I think, is. And if you're mature enough to go, okay, now that was a bit silly. How am I going to deal with that next time? And I'm going to keep an eye out for this time. And I'm not going to, and then you're actually learning every day, aren't you, really? It's your rather the same mistakes every day.
Just one statistic. Sure. Young drivers are 8 times more likely to have an accident during the night. So I think we need to ask ourselves the question, do they actually need to be driving at night? Are they just going out for a jolly once they've become a newly qualified driver? Get that experience. It's really important. And that particular time when they're most at risk is between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. So
Brilliant.
Do they really need to be going out? And just on that, not all young drivers are bad drivers. I think we need to really stipulate that. There are some very, very good young drivers out there, and they are the future of our roads. So, we're not tarnishing all young drivers here.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
Quite right. So tell us about
Harry,
fatigue. Is a big one. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, can I just pick up on that point that Chris just brought up about that early hours of the morning driving? You were literally I think you were just about to mention it, Harry, fatigue. A really serious issue, fatigue amongst all drivers, but particularly young drivers. They don't understand this concept of microsleeps. So when they're driving on the road, particularly when they're sort of driving outside of the natural circadian rhythm, check me out, circadian rhythm and the body clock, is that they get to the point, I know it's a big word, I have to look it up, is that their body gets to the point where the body wants to shut down. So they're going to start getting microsleeps, and it might just be their eyes closed for a second or so. The moment they get that first microsleep, they are destined for disaster, basically, because each time it'll just go again and again. And the stats bear it out that those collisions that involve people who fall at the wheel, fatigue, are 50% more likely to involve serious injury or fatality because there's no input made to either braking or steering. And they will literally just go straight off the road on a bend into a parking lay-by, into an parked HGV. I've seen it all. And you can usually tell very easily whether someone's fallen asleep at the wheel, because there's no skid marks, there's no steering input, there's no braking. They've literally gone off the road for no apparent reason in the middle of the night. So getting young people to think about driving when they're tired, it's something I hammer home to my two all the time. Do not drive if you're tired.
But it's easier said than done.
Stop, and then stop and get out and have a break.
It's easier said than done, though, Ollie, because they'll go, well, no, I'll be all right. I'm nearly home. Statistically, though, isn't it? You're much more likely to fall asleep at the wheel it used to be within 5 miles of your destination. What is the, I wonder if, first of all, Tamsin, if you could just describe what this sacrificial seat is. Are you able to tell us something what that is and how someone in the sacrificial seat might be affected? And can the panel give any ideas to someone in the passenger seat as to how they can get the driver to take a break, really?
Absolutely. So we know that to young people, their friends are really important. So their peers, they're guided by their peers. They value their peers' input. So the best thing you can do as a mate, if you like, if you're in the passenger seat and you're witnessing behaviour that is unsafe or it makes you feel uncomfortable, or indeed if you notice they're incredibly tired, you've got the sort of the power and the influence to intervene, because one of the reasons you definitely should do that is you're in the most vulnerable seat in the vehicle. So should there be a collision, a driver's natural reactions, if they are reacting in a way that obviously if they're asleep that's not the case, but in a normal environment, they're reacting in a way that will put you at the most serious point of impact. So it is really important that front seat passengers know the danger that they're putting themselves in potentially by being in a car where unsafe behaviour is being displayed, but also actually the influence they can have on their friends. You know, as people of that age value their friends' opinions often much more than they value their parents. So it is about sort of like the empowerment almost, and having those plans in place so that if you are a young passenger of a young driver, you're aware of sort of systems you can put in place, strategies that you can use should you feel unsafe in a vehicle. You can have you can text your parent a word, they'll call you, there's an emergency. It basically just stops that journey taking place. And there's lots of things that young drivers can sort of put in place themselves and young passengers so that they're all sort of working together, often sometimes in their own little bubble, because they don't want to sit in their car and chat about road safety. It's not that cool. But actually just making passengers aware how important their input can be into the safety of all of those in the vehicle, actually.
Thank you. And I think one thing I learned on the Learn2Live, I thought was
my
brilliant.
Car, my rules.
Well, yeah, we'll just go into that in a second. I want you to tell me about that. But if you're in the passenger seat and you're looking at the driver and they look like, and you say, are you a bit tired? And you go, no. Well, to be honest, I could do with a coffee. Can we stop? Oh, yeah, all right then. And do you know what I mean? And that's another way of getting someone to stop, especially if they're on a longer journey, of course. Go on, Ollie. My car, my rules. What is that exactly?
My car, my rules is a really, really simple concept. So basically it is, I don't know if you can see that, Harry. Can you see that? My car, my rules. Yeah. Effectively, it's for young drivers to think about if once they pass their test is actually that they lay out the ground rules, passenger getting into their car. So they say it's my rules. This came out of a young driver I stopped in Plymouth a number of years, and she just passed her test a few weeks earlier. She had 3 of her best mates in the car. None of them were older than 17. And I said to her, have you an idea of the risk you're putting yourself at? She said, I do. She said, that's why I've got my car, my rules. And she handed me a piece of paper. And on the piece of paper were written, my car, my rules. And I had 5 rules. And it was no drugs, no exceptions. Do not distract the driver. Everyone must always wear a seatbelt. No smelly farts. And only decent music to be played. And they all have 5 rules. And her mates thought this was absolutely brilliant and said, yeah, we totally agree. We completely agree. So the whole idea of the concept of my car, my rules was born out of that. So actually, as a new driver, why not have their set of rules? That any passenger that gets into the car with them has to abide by their rules. And they can be the rules to keep themselves and their passengers safe. Conversely, parents who loan sons and daughters cars, if they're fortunate enough to put them or lucky enough to be on the insurance of the car of mum and dad, parents can do exactly the same. It's their car, their rules. So actually, they can dictate the time of day they're out. They can dictate the number of passengers they carry. And actually, having that agreement It's a really simple agreement. It doesn't take, you know, it's not a contract. It's a set of agreed rules. But actually, if they are formulated by the young driver themselves, they are far more likely to want to get their passengers to agree to them. Basically, really simple, really effective.
A wonderful. Thank you, Bertie Bassett, for your suggestion. Andy, I wonder what you think of that technology. An ejector seat, no good under bridges, he says. So, go on, carry on, Chris.
Just coming in on that, certainly within the Learn2Live, which I know Ollie's been heavily involved with over the last decade. You have, Andy, and certainly Tamsin has been involved in it within Cornwall. We use the SAFE plan, very similar to My Car, My Rules. And the SAFE plan is about saying something. If something's not feeling right in your gut, as a young driver, as a passenger, just say something. Don't put up with it. Ask the driver to pull over. If you're feeling uneasy, then again, say something. And the last but least is to have an escape plan. What are you going to do if things are going wrong? As a passenger, this is, you need to take away. No one wants anyone to swamp their car. You're going to be sick. Pull over, and then do something about it. So the SAFE plan and My Car, My Rules, two really good and useful ways for new drivers.
So I think
Harry,
along with, go on.
Sorry, a really
Andy.
practical part of the SAFE plan, which all parents can do tonight, actually, it's free, don't cost them anything, is they make an arrangement with their young driver and their or passenger, and they say, look, if you're in trouble and you ring me at 4 a.m, I guarantee to come and pick you up from wherever it is, without any argument, until the next morning, until we've had a sleep, so that we get you out of a place that's not safe. Because a lot of young people worry about making that phone call because their parent is going to go ballistic. But if you enter that agreement now, if you have that chat with them when you finish listening to us, you've already done something to protect them from something that could be awful. And I think that's a really positive thing you can do to show them that you're actually worried about their welfare, and it's easy to do. You can do it tonight, and the agreement's made between the two of you, and then it's done.
That's it. And thank you very much. And a really interesting statistics by Nige is approximately 80% of collisions occur within 10 miles of home, because lots of people are actually driving within 10 miles, but also, especially with the fatigue, I find people are going, oh, no, I'm nearly there. Oh, I can relax a bit now. And even if they're psychologically saying that to themselves, and that is when the danger occurs. So many times when people have driven all the way from up country, and I've been to collisions, nasty collisions. Of course, there's no braking, there's no steering away from anything, and it can be horrendous, those results. So SAFE plan, that's it. Discuss it with the parents, isn't it? Discuss it, as you've just said, Andy. And I think really with what you were saying, Andy Cox, with the technology as well, with these plans, you've suddenly upped your chances, your youngsters' chances of not being that statistic, isn't that right?
Absolutely right. I really
just
like
within.
And I really like the views coming back there, and I think that sort of agreement in place. I mean, because so often, obviously, the technology around the black box, the dash cam, all helps, and there's more technologies cars can apply as well. But in terms of that behaviour culture agreement, I think it's so important, because so often I see peer pressure. So people feel under pressure to drive a certain way. So they might be entirely sober, but the people in the car might not be, and they're influencing their friends to drive in a certain way, and they feel sort of, as I say, that peer pressure to do so. And I think the point made, if you are brave enough ultimately to step out that, ask to step out that car, make a call to your parents to say, come and pick me up because I don't feel safe. I think, the reality is that deserves huge respect, doesn't it? And I think once you've made that sort of brave decision, your friends actually have respect for you. And I think if, putting your own safety first, getting yourself out of that situation is so important. And we don't operate in hindsight. We don't want half an hour later to wish we'd done something that we could have done. So I think having that agreement in place and that guidance and advice in place of the young people will be a big step forward.
Thank you very much. And okay, there's an interesting question from Mostly Insects. I know there's a bio I need to delve into even more with that one. But I've always been worried about other drivers when I'm on the road, and I've been telling my children that you can be the very best driver, but the car behind you might not be. But there's things you can do, isn't there? You know, what the things you can do is and Ollie, I mean, what you told all the time is you drive defensively. And so there are things. What things can you do? Someone's driving too close behind you. What can you do? Go on.
Absolutely.
Anyone.
Simplest thing in the world. If somebody is driving aggressively around you, the simplest thing to do is to find a safe place, is to pull over to the side of the road and let them go past. Just let them just get them out of the way. Just let them go past. No problem at all. Let them go
your
off and continue
ego's
their
going
journey.
to
If they
stop
want to wrap themselves around a tree,
Yeah.
One of the things
shouldn't do. No, don't let your ego stop it.
It's not worth it, is it? It's just not worth it.
I totally agree with Ollie there, but also the thing I'm going to make an advocate of it, dash cam. So, you know, report it subsequently and we'll take action on it. So, and we are, you know, taking action. People are getting points. People are losing their license in the back of that intimidating driving based on dash cam footage coming in. So there is that way to keep your ego by reporting it later.
Thank you very much. And I think Ian's just said it there. Adopt the so what attitude. Let them pass. Because there's so many regrets later on if that's the case. We could talk forever and ever on this. I mean, this is such a valuable panel. And I'd like to just thank all of you so much for attending. But it is 8 o'clock. So we need to do another one of these. And I hope that there's some really good advice there for people. It's the technology, it's those skills that not just prior to choosing the right instructor, getting the right car, and then that post examination, that training continually after, and getting those experiences and getting rid of that ego when you get in the car because they're driving a lethal weapon, basically. And thank you so much for everyone coming. And there's a little shout out for the Learn2Live. Hopes to educate young drivers so that they are aware of the pitfalls that might happen. Be aware of the fatal 5 and remember your safe plan keeps safe all. I think we'll just say thank you very much, everyone. We'll leave it there.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.